All right, well, let's move on. The 12th edition of the Africa International Film Festival, which began already, is going to last till the 11th of November. That's on Saturday. And of course, we're going to see a lot of beautiful films. You know, it's going to feature biopics of the late Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, as well as the renowned artist Nneka Adebisokundaye. But we are in total looking at 150 films, and that's a lot of movies, to be showcased at AFRIFF this year. Now, amongst those films is Black Harvest, directed by James Amuta. Interestingly, this movie is in competition and it will screen at AFRIFF today. So at 8 p.m., if you do want to check it out, feel free. It will be showing at AFRIFF today. Now let's get into my conversation. A lot of emphasis has been placed on the importance of indigenous content, indigenous filmmaking at AFRIFF this year, from the actors to the international film collaborations to the future of indigenous content. This sector, that is the indigenous sector, inspired the international feature film sections of the Academy Awards every single year. We have a slot for 5 movies that will be in the running for the possible Academy Award, the possible Oscar for the international feature film. However, within Africa, we find there is a huge gap within this sector. And now to discuss this, joining me on the show on Arise 360, award-winning film producer and actor Bikiya Graham Douglas and screenwriter and producer Abby Ajayi. It's lovely to have you lovely ladies join me on Arise 360 today. Well done, first of all, on all the work you've done so far. From yourself, Bikiya, I am amazed at the work that you do on screen. It's a huge inspiration, and you, Abby, as well. One of the biggest issues that we have on this side of the world in Nigeria is our writing. I've interviewed from Jimmy Jean-Louis to, Idris Elba, different filmmakers, and every time I ask them, how would you assess filmmaking from Africa? And specifically Nigeria, because that's where I'm from, they say, oh yeah, we're great, you guys have great content. However, it's the stories, the storyline, there's a huge gap there. So Abby, I want you to jump on this conversation, because I know you've done so much work, including How to Get Away with Murder. How would you assess our writing here? I'm sure you've looked at that. What would you say our issues are, plainly?
I'm so sorry, I didn't catch all of that, but it's an honor to be here at AFRIFF this year and to be watching so many films about the diaspora, about the continent and Nigerian filmmakers. And I think, it's a really exciting time. It's a time of incredible innovation, and we haven't really scratched the surface on our stories yet. So I think it's a really exciting time, and it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I hope, can you hear me better now? Because I caught what you said about not hearing me clearly the first time.
Yes, this is better. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I wanted us to speak on writing. I wanted us to touch on the challenges that we experience as writers within this part of the world, within Africa, within Nigeria. Have you spotted loopholes or gaps when it comes to how we write our stories?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think in terms of writing, as you say, scripts and stories are the sort of the basis of everything, and it's incredibly important. And there's always opportunities to learn and to improve one's skill set. But I think lifelong learning is a part of all writers, regardless of background. The Nollywood is obviously still quite, in relative terms, still embryonic. But I think the quality, one sees the quality is improved, and the ambition is boundless. So the range of films at AFRIFF this year are testament to stories that are indigenous, that are local, but have a global and universal resonance. And increasingly, we have a masterclass that I'm doing later on this week at the festival, and the conversation is always very much writing the stories that only you know, writing them from the heart, and really kind of learning the craft so that you can then execute it and even throw the rules out. But once you understand how scripts come together and how they're part of a bigger collaborative journey with your director, with your production, and with your performers as well.
But now, Bikiya, I want us to getting on the conversation that has to do with indigenous content. That gap, we see it slowly being filled up. There's so many filmmakers. I know that the making of Jagu Jagun is part of the panel conversations that's supposed to happen at AFRIFF this year. How important is it for us to lay emphasis on this part of the industry that is, of course, indigenous stories and indigenous filmmaking?
Okay, thanks for having me here, and it's wonderful to be at AFRIFF again, and you know, collaborations happening, networking, new connections. It's fantastic for the Nigerian film industry, the African film industry, and Indigenous stories really are who we are, and I think it's important that we continue to project our own stories and not try to copy what the West is doing. Nigeria is vast in culture and our different heritage. And I just feel like we haven't even scratched the surface. And seeing things like Jago Jagon and even Fumilara Ransom Kuti, which also one of the cast members. And I just recently shot a movie where I had the Kalabari language in the film. So there's just so much that Nigeria has to offer in storytelling, and focusing on our indigenous languages is so important. And our culture is so rich. And I think we're going to see more filmmakers take risks to tell authentic stories in content coming out and in films coming out of Nigeria. So it's exciting time for us as Africans.
Exciting time, but what I really want us to focus on, and Abby, I want you to join in the conversation. I really want us to talk about how we can even do better. Like you said, we're still at our infancy stage. We're still at a very early stage within Nollywood. But then looking forward, knowing that every day there's so many different filmmakers, whether it's feature filmmakers, short filmmakers that are striving and trying to get out there, trying to do better. There's 150 different films that are showing at AFRIFF, 150 different films that have been set up by different people with different production teams and writers and camera crew. I want us to talk about how we can do better as an industry, especially for people who are looking forward to getting in. What are some of the issues that you envision or you have seen that you feel, listen, if we can tackle this A, B, C, we can definitely take a step further to getting better, you know? So what are some of those things that you have seen that you feel we need to do better on?
That's, you know, there's so many elements to filmmaking, and I think both the joy of creative work and also the difficulty and challenges is there's never one answer to that question. There's so many routes one can take towards success. I would say some of the challenges that faces embryonic systems, whether you're in the West or even in Nigeria and with African filmmakers, is a funding and financing structure that allows for new entrants to get in, new entrants to learn about production, new entrants to be in production. And this isn't just about schemes, which is about telling people how to write. I think you learn most by doing. So opportunities where you sort of integrate both the seed development, the writing process, the production, the post-production, and then the distribution models, which is a new part of it. So I think opportunities that allow for Nigerian and African filmmakers and emerging filmmakers to go from start to finish and see a product through and see a project through, because the best learning comes from seeing the completed project and thinking, what did we succeed at? What did we fail at? And how do we learn? Equally important is how one organizes, and there has been a great AFRIFF panel about this, how one organizes funding opportunities, not just for new entrants, but for second mid-career filmmakers. How do you get to level up from that first low-budget film to that second film, and the sort of the legal understanding so that you can ensure that you protect your rights when you start to sell that project onto streamers or to international distributors. So I feel like learning and opportunities to understand funding models, and for the country, in terms of protecting authentic storytelling, I think there is a governmental arm as well in terms of how you fund those stories and how you continue to fund those stories so that there's continuity. The thing I love a lot about AFRIFF is it's in its 12th year this year, I believe, and that consistency also builds a kind of, it builds a kind of trust in that. So a funding system that's in its 20th year, because it's brought all these new filmmakers to the forefront, is very important. So I'd love to see more of that, really.
Want to jump on this?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to speak on this as well?
Okay, yes, I'll just like to add, because she covered a lot of the areas that I would have spoken about structures. And it just happens that we had a meeting a few weeks ago with government discussing what we needed to do to support the industry. And something that I said was we need to create where filmmakers, young filmmakers, can access grants to harness their skills, develop themselves on their journey to becoming bigger filmmakers who can then access loans. Because everyone talks about loans and what's your collateral, and but people don't understand that there is a process. So if they do not have the expertise, how can they access these loans? So grant systems will be very useful for the incubation stage, people at the incubation stage of their careers, and as they go further, create soft loans that filmmakers can access, and also to look at the work, the IP as property. That is another area that I think that government can step in to look at, and funders can step in to look at. And also apprenticeship programs are fantastic for developing an industry where you give people opportunities to learn and you get them to create. So that work in itself gets them through the processes of what they've learned. And I think we need more apprenticeship programs in our industry. And also, I think the diaspora is doing amazing things. I mean, Abby's come from the diaspora, and there's so many Nigerians in the diaspora doing amazing things, and also on the continent, more collaborations and us exchanging ideas and seeing how we can work together to continue to build this amazing industry. So that's what I think.
Ladies, I want us to touch on funding, and I would like you to also enlighten me on this. Nigeria is, like we've already established, relatively early in this, but even with how far we've come, we've been able to put out so much beautiful work. Just most recently looking at the Black Book, looking at stories like Jagu Jagu and Nikolakpo, the production quality. When I see a lot of international productions, oftentimes we see all these big studios that are bringing in all this money. And I'm curious, and Abby, you could touch on this. Is that how these industries also started? Like industries that have produced Oscar-winning films and, you know, Golden Globe-winning films. Did they all start out with funding on what level are that? Would you say they started out with their funding? Because, or did these industries already exist when they started? Because when I think funding, my next question is, okay, who's going to bring in the funding? We've established that, okay, the government needs to invest heavily in filmmaking, but then it's the government. Are there also areas for private individuals who can bring in investors or bring in investments? Because I don't hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of emphasis on the government bringing in funding. And I wonder if that's how that's a system that has worked, or that's how it works.
I think you're touching on a really complex but interesting area, and my feeling is that the two areas need to be in parallel. You know, new entrants are a riskier proposition, but an important proposition because that's how you build the future. I think that's where government's responsibility and soft money, so-called soft money, has a role to play to ensure that you support those emerging filmmakers. But similarly, I think what one does want to see on the continent is those bigger commercial arms, whether homegrown indigenous, I mean, you know, companies that are more commercial enterprises, but that's also where the emerging filmmakers can graduate to and start to make those bigger budget movies, and hopefully share in the successes of their work. But I think there is a need and a requirement for both private funding for film and filmmaking, and also the governmental stuff to bolster emerging filmmakers and an embryonic industry.
Absolutely. Abby, rather Bikiya, so apologies. Would you like to jump on this one? Because I think it's a thing here for us that we need to really touch on.
Well, what Abby has said is true. And the truth is that for private sector, a lot of them are in for the business, you know, and they want to take calculated risks. And so they will want to work with people who have already been tried and tested and proven that they can give them their return on investment. So I don't see a lot of private investors investing in filmmakers and producers at the incubation stage. That's where the government comes in. And I know these schemes exist in other countries, even on the continent in South Africa, in Kenya, where they have grant systems for young filmmakers, for first-time filmmakers, and just young people who are trying to make great content. So that whole incubation process has to be funded by someone. And the private sector will not be willing to get in there when they're not sure of their return on investment. So that's where government comes in. As Abby said, you're preparing for the future. So if you're able to do this, you prepare these young people by giving them the expertise and the skills. And that's when you can get not just the return on investment for the private investors, but for the whole ecosystem and for the creative economy. So it's what you put in that you will get out tomorrow. But when there are no grant systems and filmmakers, it's such an isolated journey in Nigeria. A lot of them are selling everything they have, and people are working 3, 4, 5 jobs just to fund their own projects. And we have a resilient spirit, and we're go-getters and hustlers in Nigeria, and we just have this can-do attitude to us. But it would help if the government can put aside some money to fund people at the incubation stage of their careers that will contribute to the entirety of the creative economy.
Absolutely, and I believe that those are very, very important things that we need to do and that are being done already. Abby, Ajayi, Bikiya, Graham Douglas, a big thank you to both of you for joining me on Arise 360 today. Fantastic work, by the way, that you both are doing, and just keep it up. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Have fun for the rest of AFRIFF.